Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
Everything changed when I learned to walk again. And I was 32 years old. I was 9 years into my first marriage. My husband and I had just moved to a new city because we had both just been accepted into a very competitive master's degree program. And about a week into school, I started to have some really weird symptoms. I had weird tingling, pain, and numbness in my extremities and in my spine. I started to feel weak, and I would go to put something on a shelf and it would just fall out of my hand. Or I would turn quickly to go somewhere and I would just topple over. Now, since we had just moved to a new city, we didn't have a favorite restaurant, we didn't have a dentist, we didn't have a bank, and we didn't have a doctor. So I went to the student health center and I waited in line for over an hour till I finally got to see what appeared to me to be a 12-year-old doctor with a 3-day growth of beard. And he listened to my heart and took my temperature, looked at my eyes and ears, and said, you know, everybody gets sick the first couple of weeks at a new school. So go home, get some rest, take some Tylenol. If you're not better in a week, come back. Well, I was a grown woman at this point, and I knew my body. And I also knew I was getting much worse very quickly, and I was back the next day. And I explained to him, no, there's a serious problem and I don't know what it is. Could you give me a more thorough exam? So he grudgingly said yes. And when it was time to check my patellar tendon reflex, which anybody who's ever been to the doctor knows that's when they hit your knee with a little hammer, there were no reflexes at all, nothing. And he says to me, really accusatory, well, did you have them before? And I'm like, ha, 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 joke's on you. No. So he was able to get me in to see a neurologist very quickly. And after a series of really difficult tests, I was diagnosed with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now, the way they diagnose this is by ruling out everything else. And all the everything else that they're ruling out is just awful. You have fast-growing brain tumor, some sort of spinal cord impingement, early onset, fast developing lupus, all things, MS. Now, Guillain-Barré syndrome was relatively new at that point. I, however, in a previous academic life, had been in physical therapy school. I saw one of the very first cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome in my internship. And I remember he was a giant man, about 30 years old. He was on a ventilator. He had lost in a feeding tube, and he had lost use of everything except his right eyelid. And when we wanted to communicate with him, we would go in with our alphabet board and we would point until he blinked that right eyelid. And this was the vision that filled me as soon as I got my diagnosis. I went home to my husband completely distraught. He would say hysterical, but I was very distraught and explained to him what was going on. And he got very upset with me and said that, first of all, this is a really competitive program that we're in, and you can't miss any school or you're going to lose your scholarship and our grants. And it was all in my head, and I was just getting myself really stressed out. And if I would just relax, everything would get better. So I started to cry. And he said he was sorry and went to take a shower because he realized he'd made that situation a whole lot better. And I lay down in the bed, and all of a sudden I realized that I was only crying with half of my face. And I had been in physical therapy school just long enough to know that this meant that there was cranial nerve involvement, and that is not a good thing because your cranial nerves run your brain function. They tell your lungs to breathe and your heart to beat. So I called the neurologist and explained what was going on. And he said, well, you know, I'm doing my rounds at the hospital. Why don't you just meet me in the emergency room? So when my husband got out of the shower, he drove me to the emergency room. And I remember he dropped me at the ramp while he went to park the car. And I pulled myself up by the handrail on that ramp until the emergency room doors opened and there was a chair right next to the door. And I just poured myself into the chair. And that was the last time I walked for about almost 3 months. They admitted me to the hospital and they gave me a treatment called plasmapheresis, which I think is fairly common now, but at the time it was radical and new. And it's like dialysis, except they put a catheter right into your aorta, they take out all your blood and they run it through a centrifuge, and then they give you back just your red blood cells and saline. Takes about 2 hours. The first week I had it, the first week I was in the hospital, I had it every day. The second week I was in the hospital, I had it every other day. This is where I really learned that your blood is your life. This is a terrifying process because it doesn't just take the bad stuff out of your blood. It takes out all your nutrients. It takes out all your electrolytes. You get colder and colder because your blood's not supposed to be outside your body. And most importantly, it takes out all your pain medication. So as this is happening, I'm getting colder and colder, and it's getting more and more painful. Now, I'm still grateful for this process. It did save my life. I didn't realize how endangered I was, but I was about 12 hours away from going on a respirator. And you could see when it started to turn around, all of a sudden I saw all the doctors and nurses suddenly going, oh, thank God. So then I realized I was going to have to go home. I went home. My husband picked me up, once again, dropped me at the bottom of the stairs to our second-story apartment, and went back to school to work on a project. And I pulled myself up the stairs, and actually I was crawling on all fours up the stairs, landed on the futon right inside our door, and I lived on that futon for a couple of months. And I found myself having to say things to my husband like, I know you fed me yesterday, but I really need to eat again today. Or I can't lift my hands above my shoulders and no one has washed my hair for 6 weeks. Would you please help me? And one day I was sitting on that futon and he came home. He'd gotten a burrito at the cafeteria and he was working on some stuff and sitting at the dining room table. And the thing is, even though physically I was pretty disabled, I was still all there mentally and I was pissed. And I decide I'm going to make myself something to eat. So I get up and I'm pulling myself along the counters and I get in and we had this big old refrigerator with a big metal door and the act of pulling it open made me fall to the ground. Now, there had been no housekeeping going on, especially since I got sick, and our apartment had become infested with ants. So as I try to get up from my hands and knees, I look and my hands are black with ants. Now, by this time, my husband is looking at me because clearly I'm making a scene. And I remember just looking at him and saying, as soon as I can walk, I am out of here. And to his credit, he did help me to bed and clean me up and got me dressed, but it was too late. I was done. It was over. Now, this is not a story about what a bad guy my ex-husband is. He's actually a great guy. We're still best of friends to this day. My current and final husband refers to him as his husband-in-law. He hates it when I tell this story, by the way. But what's he going to do? Divorce me? What I found as soon as I was able to walk and I left is all of the things that made me a really good wife to him and made me seek to find love in the world for myself. All of those skills made me very, very, very well equipped in the working world, and I climbed very far and fast. I thought that this experience was teaching me that I had to leave my marriage and find a better guy. What I have realized since then is it wasn't that. It's that I had set up this situation. My childhood had taught me that I was unlovable, that I was a burden, that I was shameful. One of the things I remember hearing a lot between about 5 and 10 years old was, "Boy, Carolyn, you may be dumb, but you sure are ugly." And first of all, I know I'm not dumb, and I may not be Miss America, but I'm super cute. And I climbed very far and very fast in my career. And I ended up connecting with an old friend who is now my husband. He is absolutely the love of my life. He is truly the wind beneath my wings. Because of him, I know what it is to be cherished. So we lived happily ever after the end. Well, not exactly. I like to say if you lose enough jobs, you get a great resume, and mine is particularly impressive. I found I was a little bit unmanageable because I was always running into my boss's office going, "I have a great idea. We should do this." And I always got the, "Thank you very much. Please go back to your desk and do your job." At one point, I was working in a high rise that overlooked the San Francisco Bay. I had this great office, and I loved watching all the ships coming and going in and out of the Port of Oakland and the Port of San Francisco. And one morning it was fogged in. And you may have heard about this, but a large oil tanker actually hit the Bay Bridge. And when the fog lifted, it had moved out of the shipping lane and was leaning over, just spewing its contents everywhere. And still, I'm watching all of these ships coming in and out and dragging that oil slick through the whole bay, out into the Pacific Ocean, up and down the coast. And I remember thinking, if I had brought home my groceries and dropped a bottle of olive oil at my front door, I would stop everything, I would block it off, I would clean it up, and then I would let everybody come in and out. And I realized there was no mechanism to do that in the San Francisco Bay. That Golden Gate, not a real gate. And I thought, as humans, we put ourselves above the plants and the animals and the earth. But now what I was seeing was evidence that we were putting commerce above all else, even humanity. That most of what is wrong with the world and the planet has to do with this intense lust for money and power, neither of which are real things. A little while later, I was in a particularly trying time in my life. My husband and I had adopted 2 children who were both in serious crisis. My mother was dying. My husband was having a big medical crisis. We were in bankruptcy and foreclosure. And I had been unemployed for 3 years, by the way. I was still getting up every morning and putting on my power suit and my heels, and I went to a big conference at a local golf club. Now, it had been raining for 50 days straight, and there was nothing but flooding and mudslides and all kinds of things on the news. As the conference wrapped up, I stayed behind because I really wasn't anxious to wade out into the parking lot. So I pulled my coat around me and tucked my stuff under, and I stepped out into the parking lot, and all of a sudden, the clouds parted and the sun shone, And as if on cue, the birds started singing, and I felt something. I felt loved. And I realized that the sun was not shining on me because of my great credit rating, or because of what the scale said, or because I was Mother of the Year. The sun was shining on me because I exist. And in that moment, I realized that I am a bold, brilliant, beautiful creation of a God that loves me. And so is everything else. And so is everybody else. Because I am so unmanageable, I ended up having to form my own company on about 30 days notice with no money and no credit. But with that company, number one, I've been able to employ amazing people. We've done amazing work. We are not in the sustainability business, but we are a B Corp and we are a certified green business. And through our efforts alone in our tiny community, we have saved over 30 million gallons of water. We have also diverted 3.3 million pounds of carbon from our atmosphere. And we have also saved the taxpayers over $1 million in energy costs. So if you're a taxpayer in the state of California, you are welcome. I say this because I was often, when I would run into my manager's office and say, I've got a great idea, I was always told, you cannot save the world, Carolyn. You cannot save the world. And what I want to say to all of you, don't listen when anybody tells you that you cannot save the world. You can. You just can't do it alone. Thank you.
Your story matters.